and you didn't know he had 20 keys in his trunk, and he's connected to the cartel. That's the guy that will kill you. But because he was able to get out of that traffic stop and you never detected that there was something else going on, you didn't have that confrontation with that guy because he's smarter. He's not stupid, and he's not going to get in a fight with you in front of 7-Eleven over a 12-pack of beer.
Hey, if you own a gun in California, you should have an attorney that specializes in California gun laws on your speed dial, because if you ever have legal matters that involve firearms, you need California's firearm lawyer, John Dillon, especially if you have questions about red flag laws, gun registration, gun transportation, or maybe you just need to know that your guns are California compliant. Our trusted firearms attorney is John Dillon. John Dillon specializes in California gun laws. Put his name on your phone right now. 760-642-7150. That's John Dillon, California firearms lawyer. 760-642-7150.
All right, our first guest is Varg Freeborn, self-defense and gunfight instructor, as well as a lethal force educator, author, and fitness coach. Varg's insights into violence are informed by his experience being immersed in it for half his life. How are you, Varg?
Good. How are you?
Good. Now, did I pronounce your name correctly, right? Varg Freeborn.
Varg, yes, that's correct. Yep.
Excellent. Well, welcome to the show, man. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So your book is called Violence of Mind. Why would a new gun owner want to read your book? What would they take away from it?
Well, I think the first overarching lesson the book is going to give is going to be based on common sense and preserving yourself, mainly through avoidance and ways to just not get into trouble in the first place. So I think that's probably the most important part. But then transferring over to a situation where it's unavoidable, there are very clear guidelines for how to achieve the skills and the equipment and the things that you are going to need, especially the mindset, to persevere and win in a confrontation that's unavoidable.
Now, when you say avoid getting into trouble, you're saying knowing the law so you do things legally, or are you saying behaving in such a way that you don't get into a situation that escalates to something physical, or go into a little bit more depth on that?
I think it's definitely both. Understanding the laws in which, the area in which you're operating is probably the number one thing you need to do especially if you're going to carry a gun. Mm-hmm. You need to understand the laws, then how they work where you're at. Do you have stand your ground? Do you not have stand your ground? Do you have castle doctrine? All of these things are very important to the outcome of a confrontation. If you have one, and if you know those laws beforehand, you can set yourself up with your training and your decisions to stay within those guidelines and increase your chances of winning. So that's important. But also common sense behavior and, self-control. I push self-control, very heavily throughout the book. And I think that self-control is a mark of a professional. And if you're going to carry a weapon and you're going to defend yourself, you should be as professional as you can be about it. That's going to probably guarantee your chances much more than any other action. So I think both of those is, that would be the synopsis of both of those ideas.
I got to tell you, I think that's a great message. I'm seeing more and more experts, subject matter experts when it comes to self-defense, MMA, firearms, talk about that very thing. And I think that it seems to be the opposite. I think people think they're a tough guy if they confront, when in reality, it takes toughness to not confront, and it takes wisdom to understand that I don't want to get it. I don't want to get into a tangle with this person. I have no idea what they know. I have no idea what they're capable of, and this pride thing, gets a hold of people and gets them into real trouble. And I really think the real man, the real masculinity, the real tough guy walks away. When he's able to, or talks his way out of it, walks away, doesn't escalate. And I think that message is extremely important.
Yeah, I think it is, and I mean, no one's advocating on my end that you should, let people roll you over in every circumstance. Now, that's not what we're pushing, but
Not even
having
close. No, you're
the
exactly right.
discernment.
Not even close to
Yeah,
that. Exactly.
yeah, that's having the discernment to tell when it's a time to stand your ground and hold your position, and when it's time to let something pass because it's insignificant. It's not going to affect your life in the long term.
Yeah, and so let's talk about the difference there. I think the difference is, hey, you cut me off, you're a jerk, I want to fight. No, walk away. Hey, give me your wallet, or I'm gonna, hit you and stab you. Okay, it's time to, defend myself, or you know what I mean? Isn't that? I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
is that kind of, well, maybe you do a better job of explaining what's the difference between, not letting yourself getting rolled over and making the decision to walk away from something that won't affect your
Well,
life.
the simple litmus test for me is, if I was able to walk away from this confrontation right now,
Mm-hmm.
would it not affect my life? And within a few hours, this person would fade off into the depth of my dark memory, and I would forget them, and it wouldn't affect me at all. If that's the case, then obviously avoid it. But if there's some lasting effect to allowing this thing to happen to me, as in I'm being threatened physically, or my loved ones are being threatened physically, or I might be hurt in this confrontation, even if I comply, those types of things, if I see that there is a possibility even of lasting effects on my life that could be detrimental, then that begins to be something where we talk about, okay, we're going to stand our ground. We're going to use our skills and our equipment to manage this situation.
That's interesting. And how do people acquire those skills?
Well, the good thing about this country right now is firearms training is like a smorgasbord out there. I mean, it's absolutely available, and there are people from so many different walks of life that have seen different parts of the real violence animal and have experience and can teach you. I come from the criminal violence background, and I have a vast amount of experience there. Plus, coming through law enforcement training that I was privy to, and then you've got guys out there that are lifelong law enforcement or SWAT. You got guys coming back from the GWAT, the War on Terror. 20 years of that has produced warriors that have lots of experience in different ways. So all these guys are out there putting on great classes, great courses, and you can go, and it's fairly affordable to go out and just acquire a little bit of skill that could put you that much farther ahead in both safety and also being actually capable of doing something.
What about the not so much the marksmanship and not so much the skill with a firearm? What about the other part? What about the de-escalating part? And what about the avoidance part? How do you acquire that skill, or where does somebody learn how to do that?
Well, and that's a little less available, but I've personally been pushing to make that more. That's more of my focus now. There's plenty of guys out there that can take you out to the range and teach you how to shoot.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that's the best use of my time anymore as an instructor. So I do less of that and more of mindset and confrontation management and self-control work and things like that. So there's people like me that are writing books and doing, talks and courses out there. And there's also, there's a whole host of writers out there that are, putting out pretty decent books. Tim Larkin's got some stuff out there that's decent. There's a lot of different sources that you can start to kind of ascertain that mindset, that framing your mind in a certain way that you start to think in this way rather than just, trying to wing it. You start to have some kind of a plan, some kind of recognizing a situation, and then starting to have a decision-making process, a decision-making tree, and there's a lot of different sources like my book, and I also have the second book, Beyond UDA, which goes deeper into that too. And those are good sources for that.
Beyond UDA, which you're talking about the UDA loop, right?
Yes.
What can you tell people? What does UDA stand for?
It was created by Lieutenant Colonel John Boyd of the Air Force. He began work on that, I believe in the 60s. and worked on it all the way up through the 90s. And he developed it as the Observe, Orient, Decide, Act loop. But then he took it way beyond that, and then he began to focus on the orientation part of it, because that's really what you bring to the fight. That's your cultural background, your value system, your experiences, your confidence. These are all the things that cause you to make the decisions that you make. And those are manipulatable. It just takes more time to do that. So when you focus on those, on that part of the loop, then you have this much better this foundation to make decisions from. And I think that's what I took from it. And I did a little bit of work with Chet Richards, who worked with Boyd on that concept. And Chet agreed with me on my work with it, that taking the orientation part of it and really focusing on that and building that foundation for decision making is what makes the other parts of that loop work efficiently.
Hey, Varg, Alicia's got a question for you.
Varg, I have a question for you. Listening to everything that you're sharing and your perspective, I can't help but, I did a little bit of research on you before we brought you on. And I would love for you, if you wouldn't mind, sharing a little bit about a situation that happened to you when you were 19, because I can't help but know that your background has a heavy influence on everything that you're doing now.
Yeah, the short version of it, when I was 18, I was basically put into a self-defense situation as I was by myself, and there was 3 older, larger individuals that became aggressive with me. I used a knife in that defense situation, and that did not go well for me in court. At 19, I was convicted and sent to prison, and as a teenager, I went to adult penitentiary and I served 5 years. After that, I pursued my restoration of my rights, was granted a restoration of my rights, was granted a license to carry a weapon, and also certified guard status in Ohio. And then from there, I just grew out from getting my rights restored and participating in that, and then participating in the training industry as a student beginning, and then seeing a huge gap in what was being taught versus what I had a vast amount of experience with. And that's what brought my story forward as far as what I bring to the table as an instructor.
You've lived it. That's fantastic.
That's amazing. Do you I've kind of thought, do you think that anybody's capable of anything, or do you think there's kind of 2 varieties of people out there? There are people that commit violence regularly, and people that don't. Are there criminals and non-criminals out there, or is there anybody capable of anything?
Well, under normal circumstances, there's 2. Yes. Now, if you take all the food off of the shelves for 3 weeks, then that dynamic's going to change quickly.
Right.
But so people have it in them. It's just how desperate of a situation do they need to get in to have that brought out. But I also believe that a lot of people just don't have it in them.
Let's talk. Hold it right there. Let's talk on the other side of the break. I want to go into that even further, because I think it's an important point.
So it's no secret, I'm a big believer in diversifying your money with precious metals like gold and silver. But when it comes to buying precious metals, you need the right company in your corner. That's why we have partnered with the top-rated precious metal company, Goldco. Because reputation matters. Goldco is a 6-times Inc. 5,000 winner, 2022 Company of the Year, and they've helped people like you and me place over $2 billion in gold and silver. And right now, they're offering gun owner radio supporters up to $10,000 in bonus silver when opening a qualified IRA account.
Wow.
I know. Just the fact that they're putting it in an IRA tells me these guys are the right way to go. This is your opportunity to protect yourself from out-of-control, corrupt government. Don't pass it up. Grab your phone today and give Goldco a call. Take action today so you don't regret it tomorrow. Call Goldco at 858-612-6354, 855-612-6354. Tell them you heard it about them on Gun Owners Radio and have them explain to you why this would be a smart decision.
All right, we're talking to author Varg Freeborn, and we were just talking, Varg, before we went to break on, is anybody capable of anything, or are there two types of people in the world? You pointed out that, hey, look, if there's no electricity and there's no cops and there's no food on the shelf, and then anybody's capable of anything. But for the most part, walking around society right now, if you're just walking down the street, there's kind of two varieties of people. There are people that are going to commit crime and people that aren't. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah. One of the biggest questions you get as an instructor is people talk about the switch, right? Like flipping the switch to become violent. And can you install that switch in people that don't feel like they have it? And that's it's an unanswerable question in general. It's a very individual thing. And I have encountered people that I do believe just do not have it in them to become violent, even if they were threatened with their life. So. I don't know what you can do for people like that other than you have to learn how to be good prey. And this is something that people are very uncomfortable with, but there are people in your life that you really need to teach good prey strategies to. So if you have an 8-year-old daughter, even if you send her to jiu-jitsu class, she's never going to be a formidable opponent to a 230-pound man. So she needs to have good prey instincts. There are animals in the wild that survive completely off of being excellent prey that can evade predators very well. And those are skills that are very important for people like that, and for people who are disabled or, physically incapable of doing certain tasks or certain skills. Then those type of evasive and avoiding type of strategies become more important for them, the skills and the techniques that are involved in that. And then for the people who can fathom committing violence or lethal violence towards another human being, you have to understand that human life, the value of human life has to be on a sliding scale for you. You can't just have a general view of the value of human life and that's that, and it's a static thing. Because if someone is in front of you doing terrible things that they need to be stopped, and in order to stop them, you have to use lethal force that might end their life as a result, that person's life has to become less important to you than anything else around or anyone else around. And, the ability to do that is very deep. So it requires a lot of self-reflection and a lot of time that the person needs to spend thinking about these things and thinking about the far-reaching consequences, which is very important because a post-event situation for people a lot of times is PTSD, or moral injury, and things can be very, very traumatic after an event, even if you were completely in the right. So the more you deal with that beforehand, I believe it lessens the negative effects of that afterwards.
So how do you deal with that beforehand? In other words, preparing yourself for the possibility that you may have to be involved in some kind of violent situation. How do you prepare? Like, what do you do to prepare yourself?
First of all, acknowledge that that's the reality and that may happen. Fully acknowledge it, and then start to acknowledge that you didn't wake up you don't wake up every day looking for someone to victimize or someone to hurt. So you're not a bad person because you got into a situation where somebody was attacking or murdering people and you had to hurt that person. There's no moral injury there if you understand that you weren't the one that was out looking for trouble. You acted in good conscience and on the good side of society to stop a bad person from doing a bad thing. And if you just acknowledge that and really internalize that before anything ever happens, I really believe you have a better chance at psychologically surviving. Because we talk about when there's a shooting or an event, there's financial consequences, there's legal consequences, civil consequences, there's psychological, social consequences, and you have to prepare yourself for all 5 of those categories.
So, Varg, when you mention the people that don't act or react or don't think they could do it, are you talking about the addition of black to Cooper's Code of Colors? Is that kind of the situation you're talking about, or are you talking about something different?
Can you repeat that?
So you're talking about there's some people that just don't believe they'd be able to take the steps necessary. Are we talking about Cooper's Code of Colors? How there's been the addition of black beyond the white to red? Or is that the situation you're talking about? Are people that are in black, or is that different?
No, I'm talking about people that just, due to their value systems and their moral beliefs, they can't see themselves committing violence like that. Okay. And there are people out there like that. I've met many of them.
And you were just telling us that when you were 19, you were involved in a self-defense situation, and unfortunately, you were incarcerated for 5 years. Is that right?
Yes, 5 years.
And that's where you got much of your expertise, or I guess maybe that pointed you in the direction to where the career that you're in right now. I don't know what percentage of your expertise came from. It was certainly valuable information. First off, do you did the courts make the right decision?
In my case?
Yeah.
That's a gray area there. Obviously, I don't think so, but they believed so. One of the problems with me, I used a knife, and a lot of people don't understand about knives is that knives are incredibly effective weapons, but they create a lot of damage in a very short space of time, and they're very, very messy. And so it looks very bad. And if you get into, like, if you stand next to your friend and just tap your friend on the back, at a semi-rapid pace for 10 seconds, you'll get, somewhere between 15 and 25 taps on their back. That's realistically what a stabbing is like. And so then you have to stand in the court and explain, why would a rational, reasonable person stab someone 25 times, right? And that's a very difficult hill to climb legally. Whether it should be or not, I mean, the courts aren't schooled in what it takes to stop a human body from being in action, right? So until there's a significant drop in blood pressure, there's just not, there's nothing to signal the body to stop movement. And so that's, unless you shut off the nervous system or there's a significant drop in blood pressure. So those things right there with the knife, that made it difficult for my case. So it's hard to say. I obviously think they made a mistake, but with that kind of situation in a court, it's a very, very hard case to make.
So, but you were at 19. You were a good guy. You weren't. I guess what I'm saying is you weren't a career criminal, or you weren't involved in anything bad. You weren't robbing somebody. You weren't drugged up or anything like that. This was a self-defense case where the courts decided that you didn't follow the law when it comes to self-defense, or did you have, or were you a career criminal? Were you involved in some things that were not so good?
That is the only charge I have on my record, period. That is it.
But you took a negative and you turned it around. So that's worth everything. You got your record cleaned, and you turned it around. And instead of being bitter about it, which I'm sure you're not thrilled, but you made a positive change in a lot of people's lives. So you should truly be commended for that.
I appreciate that, and that's what I try to do. Right. I try to take that situation and say, look, this can go very badly for you in a lot of really unpredictable ways. So you have to really do as much as you can beforehand to try to really stack the cards in your favor before anything ever happens. Mm-hmm. And that's the central message of everything I teach, because I paid a dear price and continue to for the rest of my life, from certain mistakes, right? And so, and in my case, I mean, the what they called the victim even came into court and admitted on record that he waited for me to turn 18, that he had intended to put his hands on me, that he had planned his attack on me. Wow. And it made no difference because they used the excessive force clause on me, and that was it. There was no overcoming that.
And 3 against 1. They don't even take that into consideration.
Well, the other 2 never engaged. Once I engaged the first guy, the other 2 backed up. So that also, now had I not engaged him so aggressively and violently, they would have engaged, but they feared their own safety.
Sure.
So
and they saw what happened to the first guy.
There's two things I think that are really important here that I want to talk to you about more. But the first is you're a guy who is trying to defend himself and still did time. I think that a lot of us walk around thinking, well, I'm a good guy. If I defend myself, I'll simply tell the cops, or hell, I got to go to court. I'll tell the court, and everything will be okay. Well, yours is a situation where it wasn't okay, even though you were truly defending yourself.
And you had the same situation, except you used pepper spray.
Very similar.
Just think if you would have used a knife.
But there's something. Well, there's another really important point. Can you stay and can we bring you into the next segment and keep talking?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Hey, have you ever wanted to go and get a pilot's license? Well, here in San Diego, pilots can fly almost every day of the year, which makes San Diego one of the best places to learn how to fly, period. Learn to fly with San Diego Flight Training International. Check out this deal just for Gun Owner Radio listeners. 1 hour of ground school, 1 hour of flight with instructors. Yep, and you actually get to fly. Normally that's $400, but for listeners, it's $350. Getting started is super easy. Call 858-569-1822. That's SDFTI. Again, 858-569-1822.
All right, we're talking to the author of Violence of Mind, Varg Freeborn. And before the break, we were talking about how you were involved in you were involved in a self-defense situation and were still incarcerated for 5 years as a result. And there were two important takeaways from that, which is why I asked the question. One is, like I was saying, even if you defend yourself, even if it's clean, even if it's clearly self-defense and you are defending yourself, there's still a possibility that you won't survive the court system. In other words, you could still spend time in jail. And that's a really important self-defense message that if you decide to use lethal force, you could truly lose everything. You could lose your family, your freedom, your bank account. You could lose everything except your life. And even then, you might if you don't do it successfully. But I think that's an important point important thing to know when you're a gun owner and you're carrying for defense. But the other thing, Varg, is we were talking about how there's two different people out there. There are criminals, people that kind of have a criminal mind. And there are people that don't. And I think that your experience at 19 going to jail for 5 years, it doesn't sound like you were in that category of a criminal. It doesn't sound like, you grew up committing crimes and doing violent acts, and then suddenly you're surrounded by people who are of a criminal mind. And I would imagine that I'm sure that experience was awful, and you wouldn't wish it on anybody. But I'm sure it was enormously valuable and gave you tremendous insight when it comes to the mind of somebody who, commits crime, commits violence regularly. Is that accurate?
Somewhat. I wouldn't say that. So I grew up in a very rough family. I grew up in a very rough area. Many of my family were criminals. And I grew up in a very violent environment. My mother was 16 when I was born. I grew up, around a lot of drugs, alcohol, a lot of violence. So I wasn't someone who was out there robbing and stealing and, victimizing people, but I did a lot of fighting as a kid. So when I hit prison, it wasn't a culture shock for me totally. Now, there were kids that I did see come in like that, and they typically did not do well. And that was very, very sad to watch. But luckily, the streets had prepared me a little bit better for that, so I didn't do badly in there. I wouldn't say that it was a 100% negative experience. But some people, go there and get their soul shattered like a wine glass, and it's irreparable. So that culture shock, is something I'm glad I didn't have. So I'm glad I had a little bit of, a violent upbringing that, while that in itself was traumatic, at least the things that I endured weren't such a culture shock, and I wasn't prepared for them. So we'll say that, right? Does that clear that up for you?
Yeah, absolutely. But I still, you got a tremendous amount of insight being surrounded by, I don't know what the right term is. I don't want to offend anybody.
High-level criminals.
Yeah,
High-level
people.
criminals.
Yeah, okay. There. I usually use the term career criminals, but people that are more likely to commit violence, more likely to commit crime. What do you learn? Like, what do we know? Like, the average Joe that's listening. People that don't commit crime, that don't have a propensity to commit crime, don't really commit acts of violence. Maybe they've never been involved in an act of violence ever. What should they know? How is it different? Like, how does the average person what do they need to know? What's some insight about a career criminal that they need to know?
Well, first of all, the biggest career criminals are politicians.
I deal with them every day.
Yeah.
I guess we're talking about violent crime.
A politician, yeah. But no, it's there's a population out there that has a high propensity for violence, and they have a lot of experience, and a lot of people like to downplay that experience because they're just criminals, and a lot of people, especially law enforcement, who come into contact with on a daily basis very low-level criminals, people who can't solve their own problems. They're getting domestic calls all the time, and they're drunk, and they're physically atrophic, and they can't really fight, and so they get this bias in their head that criminals can't fight. Well, the people that it wasn't that guy that you need to worry about. It was the guy that you pulled over for a taillight, and you didn't know he had 20 keys in his trunk, and he's connected to the cartel. That's the guy that will kill you. But because he was able to get out of that traffic stop and you never detected that there was something else going on, you didn't have that confrontation with that guy because he's smarter. He's not stupid, and he's not going to get in a fight with you in front of 7-Eleven over a 12-pack of beer. So that's the big difference, is understanding that there are higher-level people out there that are smarter, that are staying out of the way, but they tend to be among the most dangerous.
Wow, that's an interesting
that's
distinction.
The first revelation.
Yeah.
And then after that, it just scales down from there. I mean, if you look at, early, young Mike Tyson, I can't think of a human being more scary than young Mike Tyson.
Yeah.
He was an absolutely angry, just criminally angry, violent young man. And, Customato did a lot to pull that kid off the street and really help him out. And it took almost 50 years for Mike to calm down and become this humble, incredible guy that he's becoming now, that he's actually insightful and things like that. But think about who he was when he was 19, 20 years old, 21 years old. The guy, he wanted to kill people. Like, he would go in the ring, he wanted to break you, and that's the type of mentality that you could be bumping shoulders with at, at Target or, Walmart or something like that. So you have to keep that in mind, that sometimes people are incredibly dangerous, and you can't underestimate that. I really emphasize that.
I think there's a piece, that a career criminal, there's a piece of their personality, leaving the violent part aside for a second. This probably ties them into the, a politician, more so, because, politicians aren't violent. They're manipulative. And I think that, kind of the average, suburban person isn't manipulative. They're generally well-meaning, but I'm kind of, I'm making, generalizations from my armchair. I'm certainly no expert. This is really more of a question than a statement, but it seems like career criminals are very manipulative people. They're in it for themselves. They're trying to get things out of people. Even if they're not committing violence, they're trying to, hey, what's in it for me? Whereas I think the average person is not that manipulative, and they can easily be abused and used by that person. Is that making sense? Am I making any sense?
Yeah, I'll give you a quick explanation of that. A lot of people think that, prison is, all stabbings and rape. And while those elements are definitely there, and it is obviously the most hostile environment in this country, the majority of what happens there is all based on intimidation and manipulation. It is very a small percentage of the actual violence. most coercion and most action is accomplished through intimidation or some type of manipulation. And I go really into that in Beyond Duda. That's what that book's about. And talking about like how the criminal mind actually works and the manipulation and the deception and things like that, because that's, it's 90% of the problem. So the violence part is 10% of the problem. You're absolutely correct that the majority of it is manipulation, intimidation, and other types of coercion.
So what do we got to know? What is the average American? Just give us a little piece, because your book sounds fascinating on it. And I think it's an important point to make. And I think that, your personal experience brings tremendous insight to it. But what's like a little like bumper sticker sized piece of knowledge that the average person needs to know about being manipulative, or just how manipulative career criminals are?
So most violence ends up being egotistically driven or created. So first of all, if you just keep your ego in check, you'll avoid most of these people right off the bat. Your chances of living a peaceful life are much, much, much higher if you keep your ego in check and you don't allow your ego to drive you in a situation where you're in contact with these people in the first place. But if you are targeted for some reason, just having a little bit of a radar about what story you're telling yourself about who you are and how you fit into the world, and understanding how the person you're dealing with is seeing you in their story, right? And then trying to determine, okay, am I realistically looking at this situation properly? And we talked about earlier about the good guy syndrome, right? Where people just automatically think, well, I'm the good guy, so I'm not going to get in trouble, right? And that type of thinking goes even farther than just legal repercussions. It's, I'm a good person, so I'm not out here trying to manipulate people or take advantage of people, so I don't have to deal with that. And unfortunately, you do. And so when you just start to get that in your head a little bit, to have not just distrust everybody, but just understand that if somebody's running, trying to run game on you, like the media runs on us 24/7.
Yeah. Okay, that's awesome. Extremely fascinating. We got a hard break here. Thank you so much for joining us. What's your website?
VargFreeborn.com.
VargFreeborn.com. Thanks a lot, Varg. That was fascinating. Thank you so much for what you do. Thanks for watching this clip from Gun Owners Radio. If you're watching mainstream media, you're not getting the truth about guns. Gun Owners Radio is the easiest way to stay on top of the Second Amendment fight, the fight for your self-defense rights. You can watch our live stream on YouTube every Sunday from 4 to 6 p.m. California time, or if you're in San Diego, AM 1170, FM 96.1, The Answer. We're also available on your favorite podcast platform. Just search Gun Owners Radio and you'll find our show. Like and subscribe to help defend and restore the Second Amendment, not just in California, but across the country.